Hey, I'm Dr. Ariana Demers. I'm an orthopedic sports medicine surgeon, and I have successfully integrated orthobiologics into my busy practice so that I can provide a continuum of care and treat patients who are in the gap. The gap is this gray area in orthopedics where standard conservative treatments have not been effective, but surgery may not be warranted. And we usually tell our patients, come back when it's worse. What? These are your patients coming to you for help. Orthobiologics is that solution that can fill the gap and help you treat your patients who are in your office looking to you for help. Orthobiologics can also be an excellent treatment for frustrating problems without good surgical outcomes. This podcast will help you create the orthobiologics business that will make you love your job again. We will focus on the value of orthobiologics, patient selection, how to talk to your patients about money, office setup, and other logistics. If this is something you've always wanted but don't know where to start, join me in the Business of Orthobiologics podcast. Welcome to the Business of Orthobiologics podcast, where we discuss practical applications of orthobiologics in orthopedic practices. From hybrid practices to full cash practices, our experts will share real-world experiences and success stories. So listen up, stay inspired, and unlock new possibilities. Today we have Walter Sussman, who is joining us from Boston. And thank you so much, Walter, for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. So if you would like to just share a little bit about you, what your specialty is, how long you've been in Boston, that would be great. So welcome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a physiatrist by training. I have fellowship training in sports medicine, and I moved back to Boston after fellowship. I'm from Massachusetts. My family's from New England, and so it was coming home. Been here since.
Awesome. So when did you did a fellowship? Where did you do your fellowship at?
So I did my fellowship in Atlanta with Ken Mountainer at Emory, and they were kind of pioneers with a lot of the biologic stuff. And so I got my exposure there and transitioned that into practice.
Awesome. So now, did you start at where you are now, or where did you start after fellowship? Kind of take me through your journey of like where you started out. Have you always done cash practice? Have you always done orthobiologics?
Yeah. So I left the Emory model, and it was a great hybrid model with physiatry and sports medicine and orthopedics, in this really collaborative environment, and was really searching for that when I left fellowship and found that in a small private practice in Massachusetts. And so I joined them a little over 8 years ago and worked with them. They ended up getting bought out by a larger orthopedic group, and I branched off and opened up my own practice at that.
Okay, so how long ago did you say, gosh, I don't know, when this small orthopedic practice got taken over by a larger orthopedic practice, then you left and branched out on your own. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And how long ago did you make that decision?
About 3 years ago.
Okay.
Almost 4 years now. I really like, having the flexibility to spend time with my patients, having a little more control over my schedule, having, being able to cater to patients, having a little more control over my staff, and holding on to staff members who do a really good job. And I worried that, the larger corporate kind of environment, would have impeded on that.
Sure.
So that was a big part of the decision. It was also at the time with COVID, and seeing how, the groups were dealing with my staff members, my team members who had been working for 4 years, and just having a hope that I could do that in a better way.
Yeah. So in Boston, COVID was pretty rough for, there was a pretty big lockdown. Yeah.
Yeah. Not only, at the practice level, but, the hospital being able to get procedures done. So we had to make a lot of adjustments, move a lot to telemed. We lost a large percentage of our employees, people who had been with us for a long time. I think we're starting to see the light, but, it took a while to recover.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I opened up my practice just before COVID. So I'd been open for like 9 months and then whammo. And we all kind of had to figure out what the heck to do. And I think, everybody, we didn't know.
And so I hear you. There's different ways that we all dealt with it. Some people hunkered down and said, okay, we're just going to wait this out. And some people said, okay, I'm going to pivot. Some people said, heck, we're just going to be closed 2 weeks. I'm just going to stay open. It's going to be fine. So yeah, I think everybody had different responses. So now are you in your own building? Do you own the building, rent the building, lease the building?
So we lease our space.
Okay.
It's a great space. It's an area where there's a lot of medical buildings and professional buildings. We're a legal building. So it's actually nicer because there's less foot traffic but it's a great space. The Boston market, it's hard to own property here, especially when you're starting out.
Yeah. So what square footage is your office space right now?
So we started off with 15,000 square feet. So
Okay.
it's tiny.
Cool.
We really thought that it was going to be kind of a micro practice. And we got busy pretty quick. And so we actually leased out the space adjacent to us. So we're just under 5,000.
5,000 square feet. Okay. And so now, are you the sole owner of the practice? Do you have partners? How does that model work?
Yeah. So I'm the sole owner. We're the C Corp. And so,
Okay.
and with the idea that, at some point be able to grow, we've hired 2 docs in the past year who are employed physicians. So we're starting to grow.
Okay. So you're a C Corp. You're a C Corp, and then you, as the doctor, are a W-2 employee, and then you have 2 more doctors that are W-2 employees for your C Corp. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then is there any kind of like buy-in opportunity, or they wanted to be employed? How does that look for you?
Yeah. So they just started, and so figuring out that and what that structure is going to look like is stuff we started to play with those ideas. Fundamentally, I don't think doctors make really good employees. I think that bringing them on as partners, at some point is, if they're a good fit for the practice, they can produce, and help with overhead. But I don't know exactly what that structure is going to look like. And I've been fairly straightforward with our new hires about this stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there is a model that has been proven to work every time. And I mean, from my perspective, I'm a horrible employee. Like, I don't really do well with people telling me what to do. So I hear you. Other doctors may not want the other parts of business that go with it. So can you kind of bring me up to speed on, like, you had to build out, and then, is that true? You had to build out and like reno for your office. How long did that take?
The initial one was pretty quick. We had a tight window. And so within 6 weeks, they were able to get permitted and build out the space. We had our landlord do it, which helped a lot.
Okay.
Not in cost, but just the speed of doing that project.
Yeah.
Interestingly, even though that was in the heart of COVID, we had more supply chain issues with our second build out, our expansion. So that took a lot longer, 5 to 6 months, because of the lag time with a lot of supplies.
Okay. So in the first startup, how did you know how to create this business? How did you figure out, like, oh, well, I want to start a business. Of course I know what to do. How did you get that knowledge?
You need a lot of people, to help you out, and so we started with a healthcare accountant, to kind of build a P&L.
And just share with everybody, because I didn't know when I started my own business in 2010, I didn't know what a P&L was. So just for everyone who doesn't know, that's a profit and loss sheet. Didn't know that in 2010 when I started my business. So I'm just helping to educate.
Yeah, and I didn't either, So, I got plugged in with, somebody who could hold my hand with that, and half the challenge is trying to project what you can make, what your profits are going to be. And, when you work as an employed doc, you're not necessarily privy to those numbers, so you have to figure out how many patients you're seeing a month, what procedure volume is, and those numbers. And that can be a challenge, So, as I started playing with this idea, we started keeping track and trying to get our hands on good. And when you're not seeing receipts, you're making numbers based on other data that's out there. So they're kind of rough estimates. And then trying to dial in on costs, that's another anything from your EMR, you may not know that on the beginning, so there's a range and phone and internet costs and potential employee costs. And so having somebody who can kind of walk you through that, and then he helped plug us in with, business consultant, real estate person to help us find space, a banker, to help with financing. And so, you really need a team.
Now, do you think if you had to do it again, would you do it the same way, or are there things that you would do differently, knowing what you know?
Yeah, I think starting early with the numbers piece, that really is what took the longest. Was trying to make those projections, and then working with the bank, to have somebody take a risk on us. Did
you get accepted by the first bank that you applied to, or?
No, apparently dental practices are a big thing. And funding them. And so was their model. And this was kind of novel and not something they wanted to take a risk with. So, we had the second group we worked with, we got approved. So, that was the biggest time crunch, and so I think starting really early with that, giving yourself a year, kind of make sure that goes smoothly. Because it's stressful when, you don't know if your financing is coming in and your lease is about to start and trying to figure that out.
So you said you based your projections on numbers that were out there. When I started to try to find like what was out there, what the prices were, all I could find was Medicare numbers. And so I really struggled because I didn't know how to set my prices. I didn't know because you're not privy to what the contracts say. If you're like working as an employed doc or you're working in an insurance-based practice, you have no idea. So what kind of numbers did you use?
So we use CMS kind of as our basement, assuming that some of the private payers would be better. So, in general, we're pretty conservative, or I'm pretty conservative in terms of those numbers. I'd rather project lower, and hope that we're higher. I did get presented with a quarterly sheet with what I actually filled out and what I collected. So even though I couldn't break that down, I could see that the CMS numbers should be on average what I was pulling in, having hit a steady state of my old practice, and know that that's probably our range.
Gotcha. So you're kind of using your old data and trying to project and do a little math and be like, all right, well, I think this is what was billed out. This is what I got back. So it's like a third of the price.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so CMS, that's how much you get. Okay, cool. Because I struggle with this a lot. So, did you have any business training before you were like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to open my own practice?
I didn't, and so my practice manager, she had worked with me at the old practice and had just started business school. And so when I went off on my own, I relied on her first year of business school training, and
Wait, go back. You started business school?
No, my current practice manager worked with me at my old.
Oh, okay.
She started business school. And so I don't know if I would have done it without kind of people around me. I think having a support network is important, and knowing what resources you have to kind of rely on.
Sure.
And so, she knew a lot more of the front end stuff too, a lot more of the insurance piece than I do, and still handles a lot of that end of the practice. And then, we, as practice, essentially paid for the rest of her business school to have her come on board.
Nice.
And so that partnership really was a big part of making me feel comfortable taking.
Yeah. I was like, wow, you went through business school. That's amazing. Gosh, you were awesome as is. But so anyways, I think that I want to know, what's your best decision that you've made in business thus far? One that's maybe surprised you, where you're like, man, looking back, that was fantastic.
I think we got lucky with a lot of stuff. I think that, our initial projection was that, we were going to be really small. We were going to, kind of creep along. I think we got lucky with our space because we had an adjacent space that we could kind of build into. And so, one of the challenges we faced early on is, we got busy pretty quick. And we had to make a decision, are we going to have a really long wait list, and see a small number of patients, or are we going to start ramping up how many patients are going to be coming through the clinic, how we make that transition. And that required us to have more space, and to hire additional providers too to support the additional overhead of front-end staff that's required to get authorizations and deal with the insurance company.
Yeah. So you are hybrid. You take insurance and you take cash. Yeah. Okay. And you've always been hybrid, and that was your fellowship model as well. Now, was in your fellowship, it was academic. It was at Emory, right? Or was it a private practice type of model?
It's a big academic center, but they really run the orthopedic department similar to how a private practice would run.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you had some knowledge of like, oh, okay. Now, did you still have ties to your fellowship where you reached out and you're like, holy cow, I don't know how to do this? Is that something that it ran through your head, or you were feeling pretty supported with your team around you?
Yeah, I thought I had a good team. A lot of consultants who were really helpful early on, make some of these decisions.
Gotcha.
And so, it's still an academic center. They still have the broader support of a large system behind them. It's different in private practice.
Yes, it is. I agree. So from a volume perspective or percentage perspective, how much is insurance based? How much is cash based?
So, I still like to do a lot of the primary care sports medicine, the non-operative, non-procedural kind of stuff. And so we still see concussions. We still do a lot of joint injections, tendon injections, hydro dissections. 10X is a big workhorse in our clinic, and Sonex. And so, those are all things that are covered by insurance, and play that game. The biologics is about 20% of our receipts.
Okay.
And, about 10% of our patient volume.
Okay. So 2-to-1 ratio, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, you are the 10X king, right?
Yeah. So it's hard to, those aren't cheap procedures. We do some of them in house. We have a big procedure room where we can do them here, but it's not covered by insurance, so navigating that system.
So in your practice, if you do 10X in-house, it's not covered by insurance. It's Correct. A cash procedure. But if you do it at a surgery center, ASC procedure suite, then it's covered by insurance, and then you bill out your provider fee to the insurance. Is that correct?
Correct.
What would be the instance where someone would choose to have that in-house versus at a surgery center? What's your common experience for that? So
we have a couple international patients, and just navigating that with the hospital system is challenging. They're just not so much. People, we're seeing more patients with very high deductibles, $15,000 deductibles. If it's doing anything in the surgery center is going to eat up a big chunk of that. So it's cheaper for them to do it in the office. You can just do it at a lower expense.
Sure. That's great. So are you working 5 days a week right now, or do you take time off?
It's 5 days a week. There's some administrative time built in, but that's also our overflow time for patients that have to get in. Gotcha.
So can you kind of walk me through your weekly schedule, like what you do day to day? And then when do you fit time in? When do you fit time in for your family and your kids and hockey and stuff?
Yeah, so it's 8 to 4. Tuesdays are a little lighter of the day. My wife's a vet, so that's her surgery day. And so I take the kids to school, I pick them up. And then Thursdays is 2 cases in the ASC. And we do as many cases as we can book. And then in the afternoon, that's our admin time or overflow time. We're still doing a fair amount of telemeds, so we try to get the staff out a little early and do the telemeds at the end of the day. So it's not necessarily always to 4. Sometimes we end early and do the telemeds. But 5 days a week, and it's challenging early on. We've only been open 2.5 years, and so there's a lot of stuff to set up. We're still working on. It's easier now, but I have a little more time for family. But it's tough those first couple of years to find that balance.
Sure. And then you've been doing quite a bit of publishing and research and all of that. Where do you fit that part in?
After hours. Yeah. So we're a training site for the Tufts PM&R residents. So they'll spend time with us and so anything from case reports to systematic reviews and anything in between. I think I like to do it because I think it makes me a better doctor, to review the literature, know everything that's out there that I can. And so I enjoy doing that, but there's not a lot of time during the day. fit that in.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that one. So what do you think has been the benefit? What do you think the biggest benefit of integrating orthobiologics into your standard PM&R sports medicine practice? Where do you see the huge benefits from biologics?
It's a tool like any of the stuff that we use, and so trying to figure out, exactly what's going on with the patient and what their options are, is a primary goal. Using diagnostic ultrasound to really dial in on the source of their pain, differential injections to really figure out, where the pain is coming from. And then figuring out, what's the best option for them. And it may be continued therapy, it may be cortisone injection or viscosupplementation injection in certain cases, hydrodissection, and then shockwave, PRP, the BMAC, MFAT, all these are options. But figuring out, where they are in the process, how bad the pathology is, and then figuring out what's the best and fastest way we can get them better, at the least expense to them.
Sure. In your perspective, you've been in the game long enough to understand when people are presented with the option to pay cash, what do you think makes their decision? So you're giving them all these options, and they're like, nope, I want the one where I pay cash. Like, what do you think is the game changer for them? I've been trying to decide this myself, so there's no right answer, but I've just been kind of toying with what changes their mind, what makes a decision. Is it like return to sport? Is it how long it lasts? Is it like, what do you think it is?
I think it differs a lot. It's very personal, for some patients, and we definitely have patients where cost is a challenge, somewhere where it's not. I think, a lot of what they've done historically, matters. I think what friends and families have done, if they've had exposure to this, I think that weighs very heavily if they're considering it.
So
I think it's helpful, and, I don't know, I think, you have an honest conversation about all the options, and what the data is on this. And then it's, really is a shared decision-making in terms of where we start. And just because we start with one treatment doesn't mean that we burn bridges with others. So I think, if all you present is orthobiologics, in most cases, or it's a heavy sell, patients pick up on that, and, I think it's, are turned off, and I think that's the biggest difference, is being able to offer them options.
Yeah. Yeah. A continuum of care. This is just one more tool in the tool belt. Yeah. That's kind of how I've been realizing that it is well received. And don't go in with guns a-blazing, just orthobiologics only. Okay. So what do you think has been the biggest challenge for you professionally in opening this practice and doing things? What do you think's been the hardest part to kind of either master, or the hardest pill to swallow? Like, walk me through that.
Yeah. I think, there's a lot of regulatory and, laws and rules and ethical guidelines that we may not, we're not necessarily presented with, we're taught, Stark laws and some very basic stuff, medical school, but figuring out, which form a patient needs to sign. If you're going to do a biologic, they have insurance, what covers you, in that situation, not charging their insurance, and how to navigate, some of these regulatory issues. Do you bring in, some of these ancillary services, and is that okay? Some states, you can potentially sell, supplements, and some states have guidance, in terms of that. So I feel like there's a lot of these little minefields. We have an outside compliance company that come in and they review all of our documents and they tell us what we're missing. And, that was something that we did early on, just to try to cover our blind side. You don't learn that in medical school.
Right.
So those are the things that keep me up at.
Right. I hear you. What do you think has been the most difficult part from a personal standpoint or family standpoint? What do you think is really something that you've struggled with? And then maybe some insight on how to avoid this.
Yeah, I mean, this takes up a lot of time. It's not something that just comes together on its own, right? You need a lot of people around you. You need a lot of support, and your mind is here, a lot, when you're first starting out. So even when you're home, trying to be present. You may have time where you're home. Making sure that you're present when you're home, I think, is a challenge when you know that you have to review these documents, after the kids go to bed and stuff. And so, I think that beginning part, making sure that all the T's are crossed and I's dotted and stuff occupies a lot of time, both here and away. And then balancing that with seeing 20 to 30 patients a day, it's tough, to figure out, how to divide time.
Yeah. Yeah. What information do you wish you had at the outset of your journey that maybe would have made it easier?
It's a good question. Hindsight, being 2020.
Of course.
I think, the journey's the reward with this, it's hard to anticipate everything. I think, again, we got really lucky with having a good team around us. And so, even our mistakes, we learn from them. I think that's the most important thing is, to react and not be stuck or, paralyzed by, changing gears, or dogmatic with anything.
So what advice do you think you would offer a physician who's either contemplating stepping out on their own, or they're in private practice and they're really considering adding that cash-based component to their practice? What would you offer as an advice for them?
I think the cash-based procedures, make sense. It makes us better doctors to be able to offer more options to patients, especially stuff that works and it has data behind it. And, as far as this, first part of the question, stepping out, I think that, doing it for the right reasons, it's may or may not make more money, it may or may not give you more autonomy, and so figuring out why you're doing it, will kind of drive you, in those tougher times.
Sure. Now here's a question. Would you go back to the way you were working before in the other practice? Oops, I think we've frozen him. So Walter, the best question is would you go back to the way you were practicing prior to opening your own practice?
No. I love coming to office every day. It's, I'm really proud of what we've done. I'm proud of the team that we've cultivated. And I'm proud of the experience we can provide to patients, which I think was a challenge when I had no control over my schedule, and little things, just to kind of cultivate that experience, from start to finish. And so I can't imagine going back and practicing as an employed doctor.
Right. Yeah. When I've been asked that question myself, and I said, not even for $1 million. No, I don't think I would. I'm not even sure if it's 2 million. Everyone has their price, but man, I tell you what, I hear you. It is so nice to be able to cultivate that practice, cultivate that experience for your patient. And so that from start to finish, it's impeccable and they really feel cared for, and they are cared for in a completely different light than your usual practice. So awesome. Well, where can they find you? If they want to know more about Walter Sussman, where can they find you?
So we're outside Boston in Wellesley. So it's about 10 miles outside the city to the west. Our website's bostonsportsandbiologics.com or bsbortho.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. This has been the Business of Orthobiologics podcast, and I am so thankful for you sharing your experience with us. And until next time, there is always more to learn, and thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon, and tune in next time. Thanks so much. This has been a wonderful time. And this has been the Business of Orthobiologics podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully this has been helpful. This has been Walter Sussman from Boston Sports and Biologics. And this is obviously I'm Ariana Demers, your host of the Business of Orthobiologics. So until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
This has been the Business of Orthobiologics podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to know more, please join us on the website prp-now.com and click on the free masterclass. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to get more guidance on integrating PRP in your busy practice. Bye for now.